All right, everybody, welcome. This is Kareem. What's up, everybody? I am recording on the Indigo Kid. We're doing a little bit of something different for today's blog. This is the first time that I'm actually going to have an interviewee, somebody to talk to and get a little bit of insight and perspective with. Today, we're talking about photography and photography as it relates to art and exactly when photography becomes art. And I've actually invited a good friend of mine, Zaire Daniels, who is a photographer out of Canton and Akron and sort of the Akron, Canton and greater Cleveland area. Go ahead and say hey to everybody.
Hey, how's it going, everyone?
So this is really cool. But first of all, I do want to thank you for coming on here, for being my very first guest, and hopefully one day you'll be famous for it, and I'll be able to shop this interview out, make a whole
That's what's
bunch of
up.
money. But I want you to go ahead and just sort of introduce yourself a little bit. Tell us, who you are, where you come from, and basically what got you into photography.
All right, so my name is Zaire Daniels. I was born in Canton, Ohio. I'm 25. So the first thing what got me into art in high school, there was a class. It was like graphic designs, multimedia. I didn't really know too much about it, but I knew I wanted to get into like marketing, advertising, something like that. And then, so that was my junior year in high school. I started. I took that class, realized really what it was, like graphic design, was really into that, and part of the graphic design class is also photography. So I was learning both of them at the same time. Graduated, um, went to the military, did that for a bit, also went to school. And when I was in school, I was studying photography and art history at Toledo, University of Toledo. And that's where I got more of my practical training into like fine art photography and things like that. Somewhere around that time frame, I became very disillusioned with the world and different thoughts that I've been having. So I kind of wanted to move away from the art community, and that's when I kind of got into photojournalism. And I ended up graduating University of Akron this past semester in the spring of 2020. So right before everything got crazy, and all of that has kind of came in. I had a good time when I was up in Toledo with learning different mediums, like working in sculpture. I've done some printmaking and things like that. When I was at Akron, that's when I got more into art history and anthropology. So all of those things are very present in my work. I prefer, when it comes to photography, I prefer portraiture, but I also have been getting heavy into abstract photography. Um, yeah, but that's where I'm at now.
That's crazy. Like I actually like a lot of the places where your personal story goes. It kind of shows that you have experience with like multiple realms of photography when it comes to fine art. You mentioned photojournalism, you mentioned portraiture and abstract, being in the art world and kind of being outside of it a little bit too. So that's a very interesting perspective to have as a photographer. So as a non-photographer personally, I mean, I'm a painter. Like I I've always been I've always had sort of like a beef with photography. And
Yeah.
and a lot of that stems from how easy it is, like how easy representation is with photography. You basically just have to point a camera at something and push a button, and what you were looking to capture is perfectly represented. For um, painting, you literally have to study drawing, you have to study anatomy, you have to learn about skin tones, how to mix certain colors, brush control, brush strokes, different like hard bristle brushes, soft bristle brushes. Like it's a lot of stuff that you have to learn in order to get representation down. And then once you have it down, you realize that you're not really as good as you thought you were, and then you have room for improvement. So like I've always had that relationship with photography, maybe until a little bit recently, but I'm interested in the perspective of someone on the inside world of photography to kind of get an idea of whether or not um, photography has artistic value and your ideas as far as that's concerned, because I'm sure they're a lot different than mine. So what do you think about whether or not photography has artistic value?
I think your photography definitely has artistic value, and it's 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 living in a world now where there's social media, everyone has a camera in their pocket. um I think that really, one thing that it does, it shows how important still images are to us. Think about advertisements, all the posters that you see selling different sports gear. I'm thinking of like those Nike commercials, or the photos of like athletes standing around and stuff. And photography, it's very important to part of being modern. And another reason why I think you also have a beef, painters have always had beefs with photographers, because of that reason. But the crazy thing is, back in like the early 1800s, during or the late 1800s, the early times of photography, painters use photography to they use it kind of like as a stepping stone into getting into doing like landscape paintings and different things like that. So photography and painting have gone back and forth over the years since like the beginning of the invention of photography. Um,
Hold up, are you talking about, so are you talking about like just photographic references, or are you talking about painters using photography as an intermediary step in between, or in order to understand representation on the way to painting?
Yeah, yeah. So there have been, I'm foggy on these people's names, but the daguerreotype, that was like the very first type of photographic process, and it
Yeah,
was
yeah,
pretty awful. It's pretty awful to by today's standards compared to what people have in their pockets. You know what I
yeah, yeah,
mean?
yeah.
And the British and the French, they were kind of fighting, trying to figure out who's going to develop photography first, and it was the French. And the artistic community, they when things are newly invented, it has to get to a level where it's affordable for poor artists, especially in this sense, well, for the masses to be able to afford the new technology. So the way that France and England marketed the camera, England, theirs was better, but they had it to where it wasn't accessible to their community, to everyone. So in France, where it was more accessible, French painters were able to get their hands on more cameras, and that kind of is where that thing where it kind of came together, and they would use it as a representation aid. They would use it as like the intermediary to get them into painting. um one of the famous examples, one of my favorite photographers, Edward Moyridge, he used photography like scientifically, but I think it's also artistic in the same way. But what he would do is he would set up like 40 of these big old tripod, you got to put your head under a hood type cameras.
Yeah, yeah.
And, he would have people moving, dancing, walking by, and as they would pass each 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 camera, it would take a shot. And that's kind of how we got into video, and things like that. So
Interesting.
it's, yeah, I mean, photography definitely can be artistic, but there is a dark side about photography, because not only is it that it isn't as complex as some other mediums and some other forms, but it can be heavily manipulated. And that can be a good thing artistically, that can be a good thing, but it also can be negative when you talk about photography in the wider aspect of, propaganda and helping with those things, so it's a strange world. It lives in a strange world.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Especially nowadays. Like,
Mhm.
and that's really interesting what you were saying about that, because even nowadays, um, painters kind of like they'll kind of bash artists who paint from photographs, and it's, there's like that's understandable. There's a different type of painting that you're going to create when you're painting from life than, say, like what you're going to create when you're painting from a photograph. Like, the light is different. If you're not taking the right kinds of pictures, then you might wind up with something that's too closely represented. But like, even when it comes to just photography, like it's easy nowadays for me to go outside and snap like a high resolution image with my digital camera, or something like of something pretty interesting. I can do that on the auto settings, with autofocus and everything.
Oh,
Like,
right.
it's
Yeah.
point and click. Like, is that considered, would you consider that skill? Like, what does it mean to have technical skill in photography? And what's the difference between technical skill and artistic skill?
Oh, that's a lot to unpack. Run that first one by me again, because I got a lot to say about both. But run that first one by me,
So,
and
all
we'll
right.
dig
So,
into it.
first of all, what does it mean to have technical skill when it comes to photography?
Okay, so the way that I look at it is, again, like I was touching on that about manipulation. So again, with photography, now I didn't really get this because I started out in digital, and Photoshop editing, that was the thing that I learned. I picked it up really quick, and we had always had these conversations in my photography classes and just with other friends that are photographers about people that like heavily edit and over Photoshop their photos to where it doesn't look anything like real life.
Right, right,
And
right.
I'm not really about that. So I think when you're saying technically, well, I mean, art itself is subjective, but to me, that's somebody that they're they're working on their skills. That, like, you want to be able to, when you're using your camera, you want to be able to take it to where you don't have to edit. Like, what I saw, my settings, everything that I had my camera set on, all of that was perfect enough. I don't have to do much editing, or I don't have to do any editing at all, you
Okay,
know.
that makes sense.
um yeah, but I mean, to be able to know, okay, because sometimes I guess it depends on how you're using for your photography. Lighting is very important to photography. So if I'm shooting like a wedding, or if I'm in a ballroom and there's poor lights in some corners, I'm gonna constantly have to be switching my settings in my camera all the time, moving from shot to shot and room to room and things like that. So a person that's able to understand what your camera is doing, and it's all based on like the numbers, the values, it's all based reciprocally. So it's like, what I think about it, you got the lens, you got the hole in the camera, right?
Right.
And you're making it bigger and smaller depending on where the light is coming and stuff like that. So I'm always thinking, I'm taking two steps forward, I'm taking two steps back the other way. You know what I mean? So I'm always trying to figure it out on the fly. And I think that that's where the technical aspect of it, knowing your equipment, knowing what it's capable of, and then also knowing how to edit it to hide those imperfections and to beef up your image. That's what I think when we talk about the technical skill of it.
All right. So then, with all that in mind, and that's very insightful. Actually, it reminds me a lot about painting. It's really about controlling your tools, and that's what it sounds a lot like you're talking about with photography. Is like, except your tools are like light and the camera, and there's a lot more of like a technology when it comes to that, but the technology when it comes to paintbrushes is a lot more medieval. But
Mhm.
so all that, keeping all that in mind, what is the difference between technical skill when it comes to photography and then artistic skill?
Okay, now me personally, when I'm working in fine art photography, I'm working conceptually. So I would consider myself to be more of a conceptual artist where I'm at times I'm less concerned about making something that's pretty or something that's aesthetically pleasing, and I'm more interested in causing a stir or getting my emotions across through through visual. So with me, for something that's artistic, it has to be a good visual representation of what the artist statement is trying to reflect. You know what I mean? And that can come in when you're, it's photography, and you're basing everything off of something that already exists. You know what I mean? Versus if you're painting things that already exist, but you're basically making colored shapes on a piece of paper. You know what I mean?
Right, right.
And when I first thought about that, when I really sat back and thought, like, people are going to these art museums, these big fancy paintings, and they're staring at them for hours, and I'm like, you're looking at paint marks, colored paint on a piece of paper or cloth or something like that. But again, it's how the artist arranges that, and I think that the same thing can be said with photography. Not only just relying on making something that's a pretty picture, but something that really speaks to the viewer. You know what I mean? And that's what I try to aim for in my photography. You know, at times I feel like there are things that I do that are artistic in a sense, but I wouldn't consider it fine art.
Hmm.
Um, you know what I mean?
So what would you, so what would you consider fine art? Like you say that, but for me it sounds like when you're talking about conceptual art and what's artistic, are you not talking about fine art?
Okay, I guess let me break this down, because the way that I see it, you know, documentarian style photography where I'm doing like journalism. I don't. That has to be shot differently than artistic photography. So in a sense where when you're shooting journalism, you're hardly editing that. What you see is what you get, because that's truth. And that's what photography can do. That's one of the strengths of photography. It can represent truth. But then again, on the other side, it can also represent manipulated images. It can also represent a lot of different things. So um, with me, I find that, a photograph of, a politician talking or something. It might be beautifully framed, great lighting, good composition, darks and lights, everything is spot on. That would be a great photograph aesthetically, but I don't find that to be artistic. You know what I mean? In the sense of it being fine art. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, I think I'm understanding now.
So yeah, and it's like start seeing some of those older photographs that are portraits, and you're like, I can't. What can I walk away from? What has that photograph shown me? I can see that's how somebody that in like the 1800s or the 1900s, that's how they lived. But what is that really doing for me? You know what I mean? And then, photography used in that documentarian sense is It's more or less you're recording a piece of history. And something that I've had the realization, like I was saying with painting, with photography, something that I realized is what you're doing is you're using light to isolate a moment in space and time, and you're representing that moment. What you see, you're representing that um visually. In one second, one still image, so it's when you say it like that, it's more powerful than I'm just going out there and I'm taking a picture. But
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
another one of my favorite photographers, Henry Cartier-Bresson. he,
Oh,
yeah, yeah, the decisive moment. I have to talk about the decisive moment, you know
yeah.
what I mean?
Do that. Do that.
Because you see it, like when you're like there's sometimes where, for those that don't know or that aren't familiar with the decisive moment, it was basically this moment where everything lines up perfectly when you're just about to hit the shutter. But when you start photographing longer, you'll understand, oh, but maybe if I wait for like maybe like 2-3 more seconds, that's the shot. Or you take that first shot and you keep clicking, and then you're like, somewhere along in this path, I'm gonna find that shot. Like what was in my brain is gonna be manifested there. You just gotta wait for it. And so much, I've been also expanding too. I wanted to move away from doing sports photography, but I'm doing some more freelance work, and I shot a cross country meet. First time I've ever done it. First time I've been to a cross country meet,
Hmm.
and that was one of the things that I noticed. There are like, I don't know, 60, 70 kids out there running all at the same time. So to have such a wide gap to get a good image to showcase all of what's going on, you know, you really have to use that decisive moment and figure out where am I going to get the best image that's going to convey the message to the readers, especially because I'm doing a lot of stuff for the paper now journalistically.
Hmm.
But I think when it comes to my fine art, the last thing that I've done, well, I guess I'll talk about the new thing that I got my brain on now. I really enjoy texture, and I enjoy how light hits and plays off of with texture and things like that. Uh, Love collecting rocks, looking at how rocks shimmer in the light, and rust and trees, everything. So I've been taking some really close up photographs on interesting textures that I see out in the world and stuff like that. I'm setting everything to black and white so that all I'm really focusing on is I'm focusing on the lighting and I'm focusing on texture. That's all I'm looking at.
Hmm.
And it's a work in progress, but I'm getting some very interesting abstract photographs. So a lot of that stuff, it's coming together. It's coming together. So that's where I'm working now, trying to get into more of the abstract photography.
That's pretty cool, and I actually really like that idea. It's that helps me understand what you mean when you call yourself a conceptual um, photographer, and that makes a lot of sense to me. But I also feel uh, like let's say with painting, it's easy to understand. It's easy for a lot of people to understand a painting as art, even when it might not be fine art. People will look at a painting and they'll be like, oh, that's art because it's painting. But it seems like what's happening with photography now is kind of the same as what happened to painters when the camera started, like when it first came out. Painters started to look at the camera as something that's sort of taking away from the value of artistic representation. So now, like, high resolution, high megapixel cameras are more accessible now than ever. And like we were talking about earlier, everyone has one in their pocket. And it seems like I'm seeing like dramatic and eye-catching photos on like Instagram
Right. Yeah.
every day. So do you feel like artists of photography are competing with these people, and like that's making it harder for people to see photography as art?
Oh, um, I'll say I guess I answer with kind of like a little story because I'll say it like this. I sometimes do feel a little jealous when I get on social media and I see somebody that isn't a photographer, um, in the sense of working on like a fine art conceptual basis, and I see, or what really bothers me is just a bunch of pictures of like girls in bikinis and stuff like that, and that's all that this person is doing, and I'm like, there's what with what thought, what am I walking away from it? And now I don't know if there is competition, because I think that one of the beauties of art is its subjectivity. And I don't think that there will ever be I think that there are so many people, and over the history of photography, I think that it's solidified itself in place to be recognized as an art form, that I don't really see it being transposed by people that, have better megapixels and things like that, because, um you know I know a guy that's working in, um their wet plate photography, which is a sheet of metal. You put it in the back of the camera, just like in the 1800s. You take a
Oh,
picture,
okay. I know what you're talking about.
and you're doing the chemicals, and this guy, he's in California. He's got stuff on YouTube. I watch it. He sometimes has these huge landscapes
That's
that he
crazy.
had, blown up, like, huge. And I'm telling you what, man, I don't think that if you put that up against one of these Instagram pictures or something like that, the skill level will speaks for itself, and I think that there are always going to be those people that want more out of visual stimulation than just seeing a beautiful picture or something pretty. I think that there's always going to be somebody that's looking for a different meaning and a different purpose. Again, before we were talking, I showed you man. Oh, that's backwards. Yeah, Man and His Symbol, uh, by Carl Jung. But I think that for anyone, I think everyone should read it, and realize how important symbols are with communication and getting your point across and things like that. Another thing that I'm interested in focusing on with photography is body language, and that's prime example. That's a beautiful example of a form of communication, a symbol, like how you're talking, how aggressive you are, and things like that, and your
I've
voice.
never thought of that way.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, symbols, signals, things like that. And especially us visual artists, that's something that we really need to focus on. How are you gonna, if your job is to make symbols and images, make things visually, you have to look into the literature of it. And I think that thinking of those thoughts, that's what really, it helps me not only understand it from a photography aspect, but then I can understand it from a painting aspect. And I'm a sculptor as well, so I can tell it from a sculpting aspect when I'm building something that's three-dimensional versus something that's two-dimensional. Your brain's thinking on a whole different level, so
I vibe with that, especially
yeah.
especially kind of the work that I've been doing lately, where it's like taking wood carving and
Mhm.
oil painting, sort of a 3D medium and a 2D medium, and combining them. Um, that I definitely vibe with that when you're talking about sculpting and photography. That's really interesting.
Yeah, yeah. Um, and I mean, that's again, shout outs to my teachers at UT, the art department. Because that's where I got my training. You know, I got my taste for it in high school, but I really became, you know, and then this was the thing that I also battled too. You know, I've never been good at drawing. I've never been good at painting. All during, you know, middle school, even going into high school, you know, and I kind of had a weirdness. I had a distaste for art. I was like, man, it's so pointless. You can draw a few squares and it doesn't mean anything. And then when I really got into it, and then I got like the concepts behind it and things like that, that's when I was like, yo, I can really get into this. But then as a photographer, I'm looking at somebody that spent 30 hours on a painting and I'm like, oh, well, I just went outside and I took some pictures and then I edited them. You know what I mean? And I'm like, how can that equate to, how can that be on an equal footing? You know what I mean? But I think something that I've been able to, you know, and even to this day, you know, it's something that oh man, sometimes I consider myself an artist, sometimes I don't, but it has been confusing when I've met people and when I, like, if I'm at a bar or something like that, you know, and I'm explaining who I am, I'm meeting new people. I say I'm a photographer. I don't say I'm an artist, you know, and that's something that I've been conscious of, that I've, you know, it's a battle that I'm having. Can photography be art? Can I consider this art? And then when I started doing darkroom photography, so like black and white with film, that's real, and that's something that I want to get back into. But that's when I felt like that sense of I guess focus that you have to have when you're painting, because if you fuck up a canvas, that whole thing is fucked up. If I fuck up on editing digital photography, I can always control Z
Hit undo, yeah.
and undo it, you know. So it's different. But then when you're working in film with black and white photography, well, I mean, there's also color film, but when you're working in film, that sense of focus and really taking your time, that I think is more of a that's more of the craft. That's the craft right there. So I until, you know, I kind of like, as I'm getting older and I'm learning new things with photography, I've been doing it for about 10 years now, but I'd say I would really only consider myself in as an artist, a photography artist. I would only consider myself that within like the last 4 years, you know, when my concepts have started to change, and when I'm learning new techniques, and I'm starting to be able to master lighting. I'm starting to be able to get these different concepts, you know. And I look back at some of the things I was working 4 years ago, and color balance, you know, those things. And again, you know, I mean, working in printmaking, working in graphic design, all of those things really come back and build up on themselves, because, you know, I'm looking at what can I do with just a portrait of someone. You know what I mean? I'm looking at moving that photography into how can I collage. Collage is something that I've worked in as well. So what interesting pieces of this photograph can be cut out and placed together, you know. There's a lot of things that can come in with photography, you know.
Interesting. So it sounds like that's where you start to get into the creative space. Like, all right, so let me play devil's advocate right quick.
Okay.
So I'm gonna be completely unbearable, and I'm gonna say an argument kind of against photography as an art form, and I want you to tell me, or kind of like tell me what the argument is in your defense. So
Okay, I feel it.
here's what it is. Photography isn't art because nothing is being created.
Well, first off, I mean, I instantly want to go on a philosophy tip, but I'm gonna try and not get too philosophical. Uh, uh, so nothing's being created. In a sense, yes, nothing is being created, something is being reproduced. But then again, I mean, there's more than like, because that thing is, so there's a photographer, Walker. I think Katie Walker, Alice Walker, something like that. But she was working in the 1930s, and she was taking, um, there were photographs that were done during the Dust Bowl. And then, oh no, sorry. There were photographs done by one person during the Dust Bowl. And she went and photographed the photograph of that image. And, you know, it's in art museums. So but the concept of it speaks about reproduction or something like that. And then we can also get into like Marcel Duchamp, who made his ready-mades, which I think that when people think about art, um, what is the function? What is the function of the art? You know what I mean? And I think that that's the fundamental thing that that has to be answered by the viewer. And if the viewer's idea of art isn't, if they've already got themselves in a box and they're not willing to like expand their idea or their concept, then I think that that's when that's when you start believing that photography is an art. You know, but on the other side, I do understand where they're coming from, because it's like, what have you done? You know what I mean? So, because you like, and I think that depends on the type of artist. Like, so something that I grew up and a lot of my professors would say, I was interested in graffiti, and I would take these pictures of like graffiti in the cities and stuff like that. And I like sculpture, so I would take pictures of sculpture, different things like that, churches. Uh, but then it's like, well, you're not, you're learning your technical skills, you're learning your composition and things like that, but you're showcasing somebody else's artwork, basically, architecture or sculpture, things like that. And those are the things, like I said, that's what keeps me up at night, and that's what makes me wonder about photography as an art form. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. But it also sounds like, when it comes to certain processes of photography and then certain concepts, that there is a lot of potential for originality. If whether you're doing composites or darkroom photography, or if you're, doing conceptual stuff like you were talking about with textures and stuff.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, like, during the 60s and the 70s, photography used in performance, which is something that I thought was amazing, also video, I was doing projects where, I had done, I'm not sure if you're familiar, but it's a pretty famous photograph, the Portrait of the Drowning Man. Uh, Names, gotta, I've been out of college too long to remember artist names, but it's Portrait of a Drowning Man. And I could tell you it was most likely a French photographer, but I recreated the scene through, but it was a self-portrait. So I had my camera set up, and this is the behind the scenes that people don't always understand. Now, it's going October into November, in northwestern Ohio, Toledo, right on the lake. I'm at a park, and I stripped down nude at this little embankment, and I feel like I'm there early enough to where nobody will see me. It's cold, and part of what I wanted to show with the my rendition of the Portrait of the Drowning Man was some of the mental anguish that I was going through dealing with you know, mental disabilities and that sort of thing.
Hmm.
So I had this idea of like a barbarian that's dirty, you know, and you know, trying to get to the water to clean himself, and that kind of being like symbolic of you know, you're going through a lot of this mental, you're going through a lot of mental anguish, and you're trying to seek something. And the portrait of the drowning man kind of relates to, oh well, how did they die, you know, and things like that. What was it, self-inflicted? Was it, you know, was this a murder scene? So that like having those ideas coming into it. So, you know, part of what I had to do is have my camera on a tripod, had to find that perfect angle, set the auto timer to where I could slide into the water would stop, you know, and not be like so, you know, ripply, and to where I'm not, there's no blur in the photo, you know what I mean? So I had to time that. I had to do a few iterations of that until I got it perfectly. Mind you, too, my tripod and the angle that I'm shooting at, my tripod with my camera is in the water, you know, 6 foot tripod in the water, you know? So there's a lot of things that can go wrong, and there's a lot of things that photographers, when you're working in more of an artistic fine art you know, realm, there's a lot of things that go into the behind the scenes that you wouldn't see, and you don't want people to see, you know, you don't want people to know that. Like, it's a fun story I like to tell people, but I mean, that's not something that you, as a photographer, it's like magic, it's like a magician, you
Yeah.
know? You don't want to tell somebody how you're able to get that, you know.
Right.
And I kind of feel like when we would have different critiques and stuff, and with you know, in my photography classes and stuff like that, um you know, I was, there would be some photographers, they had that, you see them, and they develop your personality comes out in your art, and you can see it in their photos, and they're very, some of them are very like close, they keep that secret locked up, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
And you know, I say when I realized that was right when I got into learning about color balance. That's when I was really like, oh, now I'm starting to feel like, you know, because some photographers, they shoot with more of a warm fill, some of them shoot with more of a cold fill, and you start to see that, you start to see different, how people play with like lights and shadow, or lights and shadows, and darks and everything, and composition, context, all of those things. You know, I'm thinking like intro to art stuff, you know, like line, rhythm, you know, vibrance, those type of things.
I keep trying to tell people that composition is like really interesting, but nobody believes me.
You know, and I think, you know, I'm getting more into minimalism, and that's why now I have respect for some of those, because for me, I'm very particular about the things that I'm looking at, you know. And if I look at something like that, I'm the type of person that's like, oh my God, that leg, I can see the leg on that chair, you know, put a book under it or something. Like, it just bothers me to see it lopsided. And I think that every human has some kind of um, understanding of that. There's something that is just ingrained in us that realizes, you know, and I think I know we had said something about sacred geometry, you know, and I think that there are these geometries that exist that people, you know, people see them, and it does create some kind of sense of balance, some kind of sense of order. And that's what I've been liking a lot, and that's what I've been trying to get into. More simplistic, more color, texture based, a lot of negative space, a lot of composition.
Mm.
That's really what I'm starting to get into, more or less, you know.
That
And oh, and then with photography, you know, I've been working in portraiture for a good few years now, and I kind of want to move away from humans. I'm kind of getting to the sense I enjoy doing it, but then again, I'm like, I wonder if there's a way that I can convey, different messages without actually using humans, or if I am without using faces. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's really interesting, and it's kind of challenging, but because like that's the context, I guess, for our entire existence is interpersonality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But that, I mean, you've made a pretty strong case personally for me when it comes to photography as an art form. And honestly, it gives me an idea of what goes through the minds of photographers through their journey, when they're dipping their toes into fine art, when they're just talking about representation, when they're just learning about their technical skills and getting to that point of technical mastery. It's really awesome. And a lot of like the whole point of this was for me explorative. I wanted to understand a little bit more about, like, when does photography become art? What is the thought processes that goes through a photographer's mind when they're trying to create fine art, as opposed to when they're just taking pictures, and how the climate is for photography now. And I think that it was going to be really, really difficult for me to express that
Mm-hmm.
as a painter, which is why I'm really glad that I had you come on here and do this talk with me. So thanks a lot for sharing your perspective, Zaire. Let us know where we can find your artwork, some of your like other photography, some of your services, and kind of get to know a little bit more about you.
Well, so currently right now, you're gonna have to give me a minute. I'm actually looking up the website. Uh because I have one of those um Wix sites, because I'm still just fresh out of college, can't afford a domain name. But if you look up, it's Zaire Daniels 55 wixsite.com/ the art of Zaire. Or if you just go to Google and you type in the art of Zaire, all one word, no spaces, it'll come up. Zaire spelled Zaire. Um, that's a good spot. That's more of like a portfolio. You can see some of my work. My Instagram, which is at, oh man, let me.
you got he got ways to get in contact with him. It's just
It would
all
be
over
it
the
would
place.
be better if I could just I need to just take up a piece of like I should take a picture of all this information and then put it up. But
That
it's
scatterbrained artist.
right. But okay, so my Instagram is at the art of Zaire, all one word. Zaire is how you spell Zaire. But I've also been right now I'm freelancing for the Canton Repository, which is a local paper for Canton, and I'm working for the magazine in Akron called The Devil Strip, mostly focusing on culture and the arts. I'm also writing as well. So you get on the Devil Strip, you get on my website, you'll see the links to my photography and my writing as well.
Awesome, man. Well, thanks a lot for coming on here and sharing your perspective with us.
Yeah, no problem, man. It was
All
great
right,
meeting.
everybody. Awesome. Zaire Daniels in the building. Can't wait to work with you some more, man.
Great, great. Yeah, same here.
Peace.